Anyway, coming up in a moment, one of my favorite topics of all time, really, or current time anyway, is mass consciousness and consciousness itself. And so Dr. Garland Landrith, he was the first to publish in a conservative peer-reviewed scientific journal about how the thoughts of individuals can actually influence the outer world by reducing such variables as crime, automobile accidents, even suicides. His research found that within our minds, we have the ability to decrease these negative variables simply by our thoughts alone. His research has been published in numerous peer-reviewed scientific journals. He's also taught at numerous psychology classes at major universities and even at the federal penitentiary at Leavenworth. At his first opportunity, he traveled to the Far East and studied several years in China and India in an attempt to understand the meaning of this life. Oh, I've got a good question for him then. During this time, he lived as a monk while studying with some great teachers. Dr. Landrith received his master's in social psychology at the University of Kansas and later achieved his PhD in psychology. He has had thousands of individual and group training sessions that have helped clients become more attuned with their intuition and achieve a greater ability to listen to their own inner wisdom. In a moment, Dr. Landrith. And now, Dr. Garland Landrith. Doctor, welcome to the program.
Great being here, Art.
Is this your first time?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Well, glad to have you, and particularly on this topic. Just before we plunge into everything here, I thought I would ask you, certainly with your background, who was God before God?
Great one. Who is God before God?
Yeah.
Now, that one is an interesting one. Let me think about that. I'm not sure I can give you an answer to that one right at the moment.
We'll let you meditate.
I think I probably need a long time to meditate on that one.
All right.
I think God always, what we probably term as a God is probably always been there. It is existence itself. But we'll be getting into that in a roundabout way.
It's very hard to contemplate always been there. Always been there. Always been there. Well,
always
how can that be?
Been there.
Yeah.
It's a kind of a difficult concept.
Can't get your mind around that one. All right. In the meantime, let's begin at the beginning here. Before we even talk about this whole thing at large, I want to talk about what consciousness, what have you determined, Doctor, consciousness is? If we were to define it, come up with a Webster's thing, what is it?
I think, this is a great question. Great thinkers have actually been debating this one for thousands of years. And I think one question that can be related to this is why we have the ability to reflect about ourselves at all. I mean, it's kind of amazing that we have this experience to be able to have the experience of being in an experience, if you know what I'm saying.
Are you saying then that the ability to reflect on one's own existence constitutes a part of consciousness or a component of it?
Yes, and it's just being in the experience itself, the fact that we're aware of it. And because, when you think about it from a Darwinian point of view, it's not very adaptable. I mean,
do cats and dogs then, by extension, have that ability, or can you not? Can you rule it out?
Well, that's a great question, and it's actually in the past 10 years, or I would say about 20 years ago, most scientists did not think that cats and dogs had the ability to self-reflect. But recent research has been finding that, indeed, cats and dogs probably do have a self-awareness.
Yeah, I think
Maybe not as developed as ours, but they definitely have a self-awareness.
I think they do, too.
I mean, they're quite amazing creatures, actually.
Well, indeed they are. You have to be very close to one or the other, or some animal, to know. I'm not limiting it to cats and dogs, either. I think animals have
exactly.
a concept of self-awareness. So that's part of the human consciousness, the ability to reflect on our own existence, and I suppose even beyond. That's maybe part of it, but there's got to be more.
Yeah, there's a lot more. And, because most Western scientists have considered consciousness simply to be a byproduct of brain material, and hence has very little relevance. the research that you've been doing with mass consciousness things and the things that I've been involved with and many others have demonstrated that consciousness is far more than just a byproduct of brain matter.
I believe so, Doctor. And you and I are probably going to run into a brick wall somewhere along here because, in reading what I read at the beginning of the program, you're advocating, if I have this right, you're advocating the use of this power to decrease the negative variables that might be out there, like suicidal people, that sort of thing, with this power. Is that?
Now, yes and no.
Yes and no.
I'm saying that this is an interesting one because you're bringing up a very in-depth kind of discussion here at the very beginning. I would say that when you have more of that creative, positive force being stimulated, then those things go naturally down. It's not that you go out and you can, although you have demonstrated that you can do it by your intention alone, but this also can be done in another way through reducing the creative forces of energy. I mean, increasing the creative forces of energy. And it's a little bit different than intention. But we can probably,
Well, how is it different?
Well, because, let me give you some examples. There's some studies that have been done on group consciousness. Dr. Dean Radin. You've had him as your guest, right?
I've had Dean on the air, of course.
In one study he did, and I was going to go into this later, but we might as well start on it now.
No, let's just rock the way it goes. So.
Yeah, exactly. He had a series of experiments where they were actually looking at machines, random generating machines, but these were actually quantum machines.
Yes.
And people could intend to change the behavior of those random generators. Now, a random generator is something like a 0 or a 1. It either produces a 0 or a 1.
That's right.
Well, these machines are very sophisticated on a quantum level. And they actually, over time, over a short period of time, they will come up with almost 50% zeros and 50% ones. I mean, exactly to them out.
Random number generators,
exactly.
Yes.
And when you have the intention to change these machines, then you can change them with more ones or more zeros. Now,
yes.
Granted, the effect is rather small, but it's very consistent and it's been replicated thousands of times. And another thing that he was measuring was the group consciousness effect of large groups attending to huge events like the Olympic ceremonies, for instance. And the Olympic ceremonies, I think it was one in 1996.
Right.
They weren't attending to these machines; they were attending to the Olympic ceremonies. And so, but what's interesting, these machines were in place, and so they would tend to be less random during the Olympic ceremonies. Now, what's really intriguing is during the commercials, they went back to being random.
Oh, my.
Yeah,
really?
So it's quite fascinating. But again, they weren't trying to make the machines less random. And maybe that kind of explains what we were talking about. In some of the meditation studies that we have done, the reduction in crime rates were done as a byproduct of the meditation. The meditators did not even know they were participating in that kind of experiment.
I've got a little software program called Shape Tech that was put out for a while. It's no longer available, to the best of my understanding. But it was put out by Pear Inc., and it gave you an opportunity to, on your computer, drag down the picture of your choice. For example, I can drag a globe down on the left, and I can drag random white noise down on the right. And then it's called Chaos, and on the other you've got a picture of Earth. And then once you start the program running, your job is to make either the Earth appear solidly or the random noise appear solidly, whichever you choose, and then it will time you and rate you. And this is a very, very interesting program, and I found in pretty scary results with it, Doctor. I can sit here and I can force, on average, 70 to 80% of the time, I'm a winner. Now,
that's amazing.
Well, as a controlled experiment, the other thing you can do is to start the program running and just go into the other room and have a cup of coffee. Or just go into the other room and don't do anything. And you come back, and then the percentage falls down to way, way down. And so it's obviously working. It actually works. You can affect a machine this way. There's no doubt about it. You can do it.
It's amazing. It is absolutely amazing what's going on out there.
Well, okay. Can you explain the process that allows the physical manipulation through the air without any energy
transfers
that we understand?
Yes, exactly. It's modern physics, at least the regular, physics that we think of, not the quantum level physics, cannot explain it. Because when you look at the brain has very low voltage emissions.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to use sophisticated machines just to even measure brain waves.
Let us add, at frequencies we're capable of
very true.
detecting right now. Now, there may be some sort of radiation occurring in a spectrum that we don't have a hint about yet.
Well, we've been measuring stuff at a very, very, physics has got even electron microscopes where we can look at electrons, and everything like that. So, Of course, our sophistication in brain technology is not nearly as advanced as they are in physics.
Not nearly.
But we have now MRIs, and we have PET scans, and we have stuff we didn't have 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those things are starting to get really, sophisticated. But the question is, what kind of energy is it? I think it's a quantum field. And in that regard...
A quantum field. All right. Can you break that down in a way that the average person can understand it? What is a quantum field?
Well, let me just start from the beginning here. Let's see. I think your audience might be familiar with some of the research that's been done, so I can kind of jump ahead like this. But the main thing is, some of the research has found that we can know events before they actually happen in normal time and space.
Mm-hmm.
And this research is very consistent and very remarkable. I know for a fact there's been 50 studies done on it in different laboratories all across the world.
I absolutely believe it, yes.
One of the research studies, for instance, found that if you have a negative photograph, and you're going to be presented with that negative photograph, and you have also a positive photograph, the study was actually looking at how we react before the photographs were presented to us. And so what they did is they randomly presented us with these two photographs, a real negative, gruesome photograph, like a photograph of somebody in the morgue,
yes,
then a very nice, pleasant photograph.
Yes.
And lo and behold, they were using GSR machines, which are similar to a lie detector. They measure anxiety by measuring the skin conductance in your skin.
Sure.
And they found that these people knew what was going to happen before it was actually going to happen by their body's reaction. In other words, the body would give off this anxiety about 2 or 3 seconds before the actual negative picture was there, but it did not have the same anxiety before the positive picture.
God, that's remarkably like the experiments with the, I think it was heads of lettuce or plants that knew the. You remember the experiment down in, I think, San Diego or California somewhere? A scientist would come in with a big knife and would slice a plant in half, and then he'd leave the room. And then a bunch of other guys in white coats would come in, and they had every machine in the world hooked up to the plants, and the other guys in white coats, plants didn't sweat, no problem. But when the guy who had assassinated the plant earlier came in,
right,
all the monitors went berserk. Now, come on, plants?
Beautiful. I love that study.
But it's true.
No, there is some amazing things going on. And the study I just mentioned has been done. Well, there's another variation on it, too. They did another one with EEGs, actually an MRI, excuse me. And they had, because they were so dumbfounded by these results in this particular laboratory, they did it in another laboratory, replicated the same results, and not only that, they used an MRI, and they found not only did this happen, did we know 2 seconds beforehand, we also knew 4 seconds with an MRI. So we actually know things before they're going to happen.
That's remarkable.
And
it says all kinds of things about the nature of time. Boy, does it say a lot about
You got it. Now we're starting to talk about quantum.
Well, I assume that a quantum field exists not in a linear time as we understand it, but out across time, in the present, in the past, in the future. It just is everywhere.
Yes, and that's beautifully put. I think they have done some experiments that have blown the scientists' minds, to put it literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
And what they found is that, for instance, they were trying to study electrons for many years, and they kept trying to measure these electrons, and they kept getting disparate results. So what they did was they finally said, well, let's just try to shoot this atom right into a screen. We're not try to measure it, and let's see what we find, where this electron is and how fast it's moving.
Yes.
So they kind of shot it into this screen.
Yes.
And they found out something intriguing, something incredible.
What?
The electron was not located in time and space. It was located everywhere in time and space. So it showed up on all over the screen, everywhere.
Oh, really?
Yes, exactly. It was not more than, in other words...
Now, how did they actually measure the fact that it was everywhere? I mean, I need to understand more about this.
Well,
it's
this
remarkable.
was let me give you an example. Now, this is being a poor example, but this may be easy for everybody to visualize. Normally, in what you have is an atom, and let's say it's taken and then you have like a electron or two running around that atom. Let's just take a simple one with one atom and one electron.
Right.
So what you have is they use very sophisticated machinery to try to measure the movements and where this atom is.
Of course.
I mean, the electron is, not the atom. And they've been able to document where it was. Now, here's something even more far out, and I don't know how
Okay, but what I didn't get is how they document it's everywhere.
Well, because they didn't measure it. Because what happened was, when you try to measure it, the electron appears. When you don't try to measure it, the electron is everywhere at once, and that is the best way I can explain it. It completely boggles the mind.
It does.
It's the experiment. When I read about it, I was so intrigued, and you know what? I would say maybe one person in 1,000 even knows about the experiment. But that experiment tells us a lot about what's happening with the other experiments on people that we just talked about. They have labeled this in physics. What do they call that? They called it, let's see here, where they call it. I forgot the name of the name, but a quantum, it's called, I'm trying to remember here.
Quantum something, huh?
It's quantum superimposition. In other words, it can be in many places at the same time.
Quantum superimposition.
Yeah. It means it can be in all places at once. Which means it breaks every time-space boundary that we know about matter.
Yes.
Which is what we're starting to see in consciousness. What you've been doing with your experiments is, in a sense, demonstrating that something is going on here.
What I stumbled into. Now, this has been going on for, I don't know, a couple of years maybe, or more. A couple of years. No, a little more than that. And what I stumbled into was, to me, a little bit frightening, to be honest with you. Totally intriguing, and I went stumbling into it like a kid, kind of, hardly thinking about it. And then I began to think about it. When I really began to think about it, it scared me. And I
don't blame you.
And I backed up from it quite quickly. And, in fact, I quickly had Dean Radin on the air. I'll get into all of this when we come back. We've got to take a break, Doctor. It's the bottom of the hour from the high desert in the middle of the night. We're discussing consciousness and now mass-directed consciousness, the very thing we've experimented with quite some number of times on this very program. Stay right where you are.
From coast to coast and worldwide on the internet, this is Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell.
I really have no idea how this experimental thing started on the program, but I will relate a little bit of it to you in a moment. We'll review it, what we did, and maybe what we should do or won't do, or I don't know. Anyway, we'll tell you about the experiments in a moment. Let's face it. We deal in things on this program that are at the fringe. They're at the edge. There's no question about it. That's what we do here. That's what we're all about. And so maybe it was a natural thing for this to fall into the hands of a talk show host doing a program on this kind of material. Whatever it was, whether it was remote influencing that we were discussing or whether it was the study at Princeton that came up. I think that came up a little later, though. And whatever it was that we were doing at the time, I decided foolishly, as a talk show host, I thought, hey, I've got millions of people out there. What happens if I have them concentrate on getting something massive done? Hey, let's try to produce rain. And there was a drought going on in Florida, one down in Texas, I think, one up in the Northwest in Canada. And I said, let's play with making rain. And so every couple of weeks or so, for a while, I had millions of people actually take a devoted moment out and concentrate on making rain in a place where there was a forecast for no rain, where they were suffering. And I'll be damned if it didn't rain. And I mean within the hour it rained. No clouds, clouds formed, it rained. I swear to you it happened. Some of you were here, you know it happened. We went to work for some people who had hopeless diagnosis. It worked. They recovered. It did incredible things, 9, 10, 11 times. I forget how many experiments we did. But then I began thinking about what I was doing. And people began writing to me suggesting we alter the path of hurricanes away from the coast, a noble goal, that kind of thing. But then I thought, eventually, Doctor, I thought, you know what? I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And while it might be fun to direct consciousness toward pushing a hurricane off coast, maybe we'd succeed, and maybe it would build up to a Category 5 and kill thousands of people when it finally did come ashore. I thought, the law of unintended consequences. I don't know what I'm doing. Maybe that was some little wisdom creeping in. I had Dean Radin on the show. I asked Dean, I'm feeling not comfortable with continuing with this until I understand it. He agreed. Smart move, Art. Don't play with it until you know what you're playing with. And, of course, then, Doctor, it might be worthwhile for you to explain the people at Princeton who are doing these experiments that I began hearing about and that Dean Radin told me about are not happy about them becoming public at all. And the reason, Doctor, they're not happy is because the mere fact of the public knowing they're going on, they're afraid will foul their scientific results. I understand that fear. But maybe you can explain, you might as well, at least in some extent, what they've done at Princeton.
Well, the stuff at Princeton, I think I kind of gave you a brief synopsis of it, but it's one of the most exciting kinds of research that has been done. What they're doing is they're showing that groups of individuals, when they are kind of focusing on one event, can actually change the behavior of machines.
Oh yes, but Princeton. When I say Princeton, the experiment in which they have what they call eggs located all over the world, right?
Right.
Okay, an egg is what?
The Global Consciousness Project. The eggs are those particular machines. They're actually let's see, what is it called? It's a quantum random generator.
Yeah, they're computers, right?
Right.
Okay, they're computers and they're located all over the world, I understand.
At last I read, there was about 55 of them.
55, really?
Yeah, and they have them all over in different parts of the country. And what they're doing is they're just monitoring the randomness of these machines while at the same time they're monitoring the current events that are going on.
Okay, in other words, folks, these machines are spitting out, as he suggested earlier, ones and zeros, random ones and zeros, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, 0, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, whatever, random. That's what the computer's job is, and so they monitor this all around the world, these eggs, and they all report back to Princeton, and then they also watch world events like 9/11, and of course what startled me and the world, Doctor, was when they produced the graph showing us 9/11.
Right.
And sometime before the actual event itself, there was a spike that went right up off the chart.
Right, actually before the event.
Yes, before the event.
It was amazing.
It was amazing. And I tried to get somebody from the project itself on the air, but again, they don't really want to talk about it publicly because it might skew what they're doing, the results of what they're doing. But we're on to something really, really, really big here. So big that it's caused me pause. Now, how do you feel about the fact that I've paused?
Again, I think I have kind of mixed feelings about it. I'm kind of more pro doing it than you are. You might be.
I can tell.
But I do understand your hesitancy, and I think there is, in some ways, I don't think if it were. Here's the angle on this that I would take. And it's probably different than other people you might have talked to about before. I think in order for you to actually be able to do it, you have to be contacting some source of law of nature that would allow it to happen. I don't think you can actually violate too many laws of nature by allowing it to happen. However, there's a caveat here. I think in order to actually gain the powers of the mind, so to speak, you have to kind of surrender. And to surrender means we surrender that part of us that would be destructive to gain union with the creative aspect of nature.
But how do you know what can and can't be done? Since we don't understand the real enough of the nature of this, or maybe I'm talking to somebody who does understand enough of this. But how do we know what can and can't be done? How do we know that we can't give somebody a heart attack? How do we know that we can't kill someone with it? How do we know that we can't cause a catastrophic ecological event, or for all I know, we are causing one?
Well, I think we're already on that road. If your book is to be believed, which I think we should, we're already going to be doing it whether we do something with our consciousness or not. So I think, but your point is a good one. Your point is a very good one. I think what we do, what a lot of the meditation groups do, is they try to put the mind in a place where the mind is completely positive. And that involves, again, talking about consciousness. And in a sense, we started talking about consciousness, but one thing I didn't mention was I think that in other words, this is a long, long conversation here, because really what I was going to say is the consciousness has several different elements to it. We normally think of consciousness. We think of consciousness of something. Okay, I'm watching something. I'm seeing something, I'm feeling something, but there is something else that's an aspect of consciousness, and that is pure consciousness. It's different than even self-reflection. And that pure consciousness is what I think is the basis for all the mystical experience, no matter what.
Describe what you mean to me by pure consciousness.
Well, if I look at you, or if I think about you, or I feel something towards you, it's consciousness that has an element involved with it.
Yes?
Pure consciousness is consciousness without any element. It's just, in other words, in order to have consciousness of something, you have to first have consciousness, the potential of consciousness. Now, so it's pure consciousness.
You sort of just lost me a little bit.
Maybe...
I understand that I could be thinking of you. I'm conscious of you.
Right.
But then there could be times when I have absolutely no input. When I'm lying in bed, my eyes are closed. My consciousness still races until I finally achieve sleep, and I think I'm aware of all kinds of things, right? Without being aware of anything specific. I'm just aware of all kinds of things.
Let me ask you a question. When you were having that experience, did you ever have the experience where you might think that you were asleep, but then you realized you were awake? You kind of got a gap in there?
There are...
It's usually a fairly common experience. People, when they think about it, they've had that experience before.
Well, I've had a lot of experiences when in that, let's call it twilight zone between wakefulness and sleep. I've had some remarkable things happen.
Exactly. Now we're talking. This is what I'm talking about, where the boundaries start to disappear. and we start to have what we call pure consciousness.
I've solved problems that were insoluble
Exactly.
in that little flash.
The aha experience.
Exactly.
There is a field down there where you can get messages, where you can kind of feel connected with everything in the universe. And that field is what is termed in, and I think that field, I've kind of defined it as pure consciousness, but that field was what I think is the basis for all the mystical experiences.
You have studied in India, I believe, correct?
Right.
And you lived a life of, you were a monk for a while.
Yes, I was. I actually even went to an Episcopal monastery in New York for a little while.
What have you seen people capable of great concentration and meditation do things that are inexplicable with their minds?
Yes, and I have seen it not only with that, but also with some of the research that we've done. I have not seen anybody. I have seen people, for instance, that could tell exactly if we had a coin in one hand and they would get it 100%. I mean, without any, and this is similar to even better than 80%, what you were getting with your machines. They can do it 100. They usually don't use that power for gain, but they have that power, if you know what I'm saying. They would never do it as a side trick, but we were testing it out just for people that would to see what the capacities were.
You see, I have a hard time grasping the concept that this power, which I do believe is real, can only be used for good, which I know is or gain. Why shouldn't you be able to use it for gain? If it's a power, then it's just a power,
right,
like any other, ultimately, and its direction determines whether it's used for good or evil. I mean, it's just a power. Do you buy into that, or do you believe that it can only be used for good? And those people who develop it never would use it for gain.
I love the way you use those expressions in your voice.
Well,
they tell a lot.
Yeah.
No, I listen. You're making brilliant points.
Well, I don't know if I am.
Here's what I think. I think there are laws of nature, and I think we can contact these laws of nature. And I think that our powers increase the more we surrender to these laws of nature. Our powers also increase. Ultimately, what you're asking me is, why is there destructive forces and why are there creative forces? And how can we kind of differentiate between the two?
Well, I think I'm more asking you, this force that we both believe to be real, I think it can probably be directed either way, for good or... I mean, good is subjective, right, really, and or bad, and that's subjective, too. It might depend on which end of the mind knife you're on. I don't know.
Well, I think there's laws of nature. If you violate the laws of nature, you kind of produce karma, and it comes back, and it kind of, if you use it for bad ends, yes, it's true. I mean, I think you can do it theoretically.